Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. It's been a long time. After a long hiatus, I mean, we've been trying to get this guy on the podcast for certainly some time now. And he's here, the daddy of Yorkville, the king, Eric Sherman, First Capital. Thank you for coming, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm not sure, quite the king, but maybe the prince or something like that.
Listen, it's basically like you walk through Yorkville, and that's what I was thinking about today when I was thinking about what are we going to talk about on the podcast and what am I going to bring up? I mean, it's kind of cool in my industry where you can sell a house and then you can drive by a few weeks later and be like, yeah, that's the house I sold, right? It kind of gives you, a little bit of appreciation for what you do. I mean, you're walking through Yorkville and you're like, yeah, put this here. Yeah, negotiated this deal. It's like literally the King of Yorkville.
I mean, that's really why I enjoy the industry so much on my end on the retail side is the ability to kind of conceive of a concept and a brand or a category and say, this space would be great for a restaurant. And there's no Italian restaurant here. Or there's, no amazing cafe here. And so you go out and you find the great cafe that you believe is going to work. And then, you negotiate the deal and, whatever it is, 6 months, a year later, all of a sudden you see people popping in and out and enjoying coffee, and definitely brings some pride there.
That's so cool. When you're selling a house, it's like you get the house ready for any buyer. It could be any buyer, right? You open up, the goal is to open that house up to the largest buyer pool possible. You don't know if a first-time home buyer is going to buy it. You don't know if, someone with 5 kids is going to buy it, or if an investor is going to buy it and rent it out, right? You try and, match the house up to as many people as possible. Where with you, I feel like in your business, it's like you're looking for that specific renter or that specific business that's going to fill that need, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on the portfolio. It depends on the property. But as it relates to the Yorkville portfolio in particular, curation and merchandising is very, very important. So, when we're talking about Yorkville Avenue, where we own the majority of the street from a retail perspective, we do get calls all the time from different kinds of retailers. We have to be very, very careful about who we work with. And that's because, one wrong move, and at least, I put the pressure on myself, or we put the pressures on ourselves to think this way, but one wrong move and it could kind of flip the switch on how people view the street. Whoever's familiar with Yorkville, you walk down the street, you see Chanel, you see Brunello Cucinelli, you see Majesty's Pleasure sitting on, the 3rd floor above Brunello. And it's like all of these things have to work together. And then you get some concepts that pop in properties we don't necessarily own that might change the mix a little bit. But yeah, curation is very important. And then we might have other properties, in other areas of the city or the country where it's more like what you're saying. You kind of open the door to as many groups as you can, and it's all about occupancy, finding someone to fill the space. So it really depends, but yeah, curation, especially in the higher end shopping areas, is very, very important.
So for those of you who don't know, and I know I said King of Yorkville, Daddy of Yorkville, I'm just going to read the first line here of the LinkedIn about section of your profile here. So Eric is responsible for managing development, brand strategy, lease negotiation, and budget forecast for the various properties First Capital owns/manages in the Yorkville neighborhood. So that's what you do. Tell us a little bit about how you got into that. I know, it looks like, at least from the LinkedIn profile, that, you weren't jumping around. You weren't, going into different industries. Real estate kind of always had your attention, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been with First Capital almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in October, which is, a very long time. It feels like it went by in a snap, but it's, and I also don't know a lot of people kind of in our generation that have necessarily been with the same company or the same group for a long period of time. But I would say, I've always been interested in real estate. And coming out of school, I worked for, or actually while I was in school, I was a summer student at a big real estate company for a couple of years, and then really enjoyed that. And then worked out of school for like more of an industrial private real estate company for about a year, and wasn't a big fan. Wanted to get back to the retail side, and joined First Capital, like entry level leasing representative. Got a portfolio of properties out in Western Ontario, London, Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, Guelph. Did that for a while, slowly started moving into the 416, and then we were really getting into some of the urban stuff at that point a few years later, and had an opportunity to start working on the Yorkville stuff kind of in its relative infancy. And then, have had opportunities for growth and for expanding, outside of leasing and into property management, operations, construction, development, sort of all the facets of the business. And now I have the opportunity to oversee the Yorkville team, and really exciting and challenging and fun at the same time.
Right.
So.
Well, it looks like, you're talking about these other avenues and different parts of your business. You worked at Sterling Caramar for a little while. Like, they're big property managers, right?
Yeah. They do residential property management, commercial property management. That was, right out of school, kind of super entry level for me, but gave me a good opportunity to start learning about the business and start learning about the property management side.
Right.
We actually work with Sterling Caramar today, to manages some of our residential units that we own. So.
Right. Was it always were you always thinking leasing?
Honestly, not necessarily. Like, I didn't really know so much about the industry, and you coming in as a young professional out of school, you hear about investments and development, and these are kind of like the sexy buzzwords that, so I was coming out of school and I was like, development and investments, and without really knowing what that meant. Without having a planning degree, which is generally what pushes you into the development side, or necessarily like a business, or finance background, which is kind of pushes you to the investment side. Really, leasing was the piece that stood out. And leasing, I find, is really interesting. You have people with MBAs that get into leasing. You have people with a high school diploma that get into leasing. Right. It's a little bit less of a natural path and more, kind of similar to residential real estate. You have people who have, big degrees, big educations. You have people who went out and got their licenses and started
you have people
grinding.
Who are college dropouts.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So it's leasing is not dissimilar in that it's a sales focused job. It's relationship. You learn through experience. And it ended up, I always tell young people who are coming out of school or interested in commercial real estate, let's say, that I think leasing is the best place to start, because it teaches you how to negotiate. It sort of shows you the industry in a unique way. You learn about concepts, you create relationships. I think the relationship side is something you can't learn. You could learn how to, push out a spreadsheet, draft a pro forma. You could learn how to do these things. The relationships that I've been able to build over the past 10 years are things that, I'll always carry with me through my career, and you can't take that away. So, leasing, it was a great sort of avenue to get into, the more technical side of the business, which there are opportunities to do, as you grow. Tell
me a little bit about working with these luxury brands. Like, you name dropped a few, Chanel, Balenciaga, you guys own all of Yorkville Village. How did that kind of start? How did you find that adjustment? Like, we're not working with ma and pa shops over here, right? Like, there must be a big difference.
I mean, at the end of the day, on one hand, leasing is leasing and real estate is real estate, retail is retail. So, I was able to cut my teeth on some, let's say, like B-level malls in Scarborough, and outdoor groceries, anchored shopping centers in the GTA. And so, there are a lot of similarities in terms of how deals are approached, and, fundamentally there's a vacant space. I want this space. Here's the rent that I'll pay. Obviously, in Scarborough, the rents are a tenth of what they are in Yorkville or more. But a lease is a lease. On the flip side, kind of like what we were talking about before, there's a different level of understanding and curation required. You're talking about a lot more dollars. You're talking about, huge investments in the capital build out of these spaces, the design of these spaces, potentially tenant allowances, rents. The deals have to be more creative for sure, especially in a market like we're in, or at least as we have been in the past few years. So, you really need to have an understanding. I mean, getting into the Yorkville stuff, I was not an expert in fashion at all, by any means. Probably still am not, but, I can pass. So, I took that on as a hobby. I was like, okay, if I'm going to be working on this stuff, I need to learn. I need to read women's wear daily. I need to, look at the fashion weeks and see who's hot and who's not, and Luxury Daily and all these like publications, and drive around. And when I go to LA or Miami or New York, I'm walking these streets and trying to figure out who's what and where and who's hot. And so that became a hobby, and that's really important. And that's a little bit different than some of the other stuff. Like, you're not plucking in a KFC and nothing against KFC. KFC's great, but you're trying to find really good operators. And I guess the pool gets a lot smaller. So instead of having this huge bucket of potential retailers that are represented by brokers and that are at the ICSE conferences, which are the conferences that we have a few times a year, you're out there dealing with consultants in New York and, head offices in Paris. And it's just a bit more complicated and a little bit more involved.
No, and that's like, I've never thought about it that way in terms of having your pulse, it's having your finger on the pulse of like, pop culture basically, right? And it's the same thing if you were in the restaurant industry of retail, that part of knowing what restaurants are hot and what chefs are hot who are trying to open new restaurants in different locations. And is that something that you've seen a little bit in your job, bringing these brands that aren't in Canada, that aren't in Toronto, over here? And is there any spoilers that we can have here, that any new brands we're going to be getting?
Yeah. So, and that's the point too, is like, you need to have your pulse on kind of pop culture, let's say, but also on kind of global retail trends or global trends in business, and convincing these brands to come to Yorkville. It's not just, hey, Balenciaga, are you ready to open a store in Yorkville? Like, a lot of these brands don't necessarily even know what Yorkville is. It's an education on the country, because we're competing against China. We want to open 4 stores in China and 2 more in the US. And, why should we do 1 in Canada? And then when you're in Canada, it's like, do we do Vancouver? Do we do Toronto? When we do Toronto, and you convince them, okay, we need Canada, we need Toronto, then it's okay, Yorkdale or Bloor Yorkville predominantly. Right. And so why Bloor Yorkville first? And then, okay, Bloor Yorkville, why Yorkville Avenue? Why our property? So you really have to go like macro to micro when you're talking to these brands and trying to convince them to come. But yeah, on the restaurant side too, it's not dissimilar. There's the pandemic hit the restaurant industry very, very hard. There's a lot of operators had to close or had to really, dramatically change their operation. But out of it came a bit of consolidation. So you have some of the top restaurant groups that are, that have consolidated, that control some of the best concepts that we have. And then you also have to balance that with international concepts that may want to come in. And would we rather do an international concept, or would you rather work with a really great local operator who understands the market? Right. So all these things have to be weighed. In terms of new concepts, there's one that is we're not able to formally announce yet, but I will definitely give you a heads up next when we actually are. But on Yorkville Avenue, there's an 11,000 square foot building where Anthropology used to be. And we've done a deal, first to market, first in the country, with one of the best brands in the world. in my opinion. And they're in possession. They're under construction right now. We're under strict NDA to not announce it quite yet, but they're hoping to open in the summer, and hopefully in the next month or two we'll be able to announce it. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been, over the last couple years, we had Chick-fil-A come in.
Yeah.
Now we're hearing all the rumors about Shake Shack coming in. In Jason's notes, he wanted us to talk a little bit about bringing to Toronto.
Yeah.
Were you a part of that?
No comment on that one, but yes, Chick-fil-A was an amazing first to market deal at Yonge and Bloor, which is a bit of a different market than Yorkville Avenue.
Is that your property?
Yeah, so Yonge and Bloor is our property. We can talk about Nordstrom and Nordstrom Rack. That's our building there, Yonge and Bloor. That's where we brought. I can actually announce one deal that we did at Yonge and Bloor. So where Chick-fil-A is and where Nordstrom Rack is closing soon. There was a McEwen grocery concept in about 18,000 square feet, kind of subterranean predominantly. And so they closed during the pandemic. And we've done a deal with the Ballroom, which is the bowling and entertainment concept downtown. So John and Adelaide. So that's the Ballroom Bowl. This is going to be called the Ballroom Social, which is more tailored after Pinewood Social type of concept, which is in Nashville. So it's going to be elevated food and beverage, bowling, entertainment.
I feel like that's missing from
It's
Yorkville.
completely missing.
Like, where do you, when, I've got a lot of buddies living in Yorkville, and, sure, you can go walk out anywhere, grab a pasta and a drink, and an expensive drink, and, go sit on Casimoto rooftop and enjoy. But, where can you go? I don't know how many places there is for, crazy live music, or going to really dance and have a good time and bowl. That's such a cool concept.
There's very little for such a densely populated area, populated both residentially and also office crowd, which is coming back in. There's not a lot of entertainment in the conventional sense in Yorkville, so there's amazing food and beverage, amazing hospitality, hotels. But aside from really the varsity theaters where you could go see a movie, which is a different kind of a thing, I think the Ballroom is going to fill that void. And I think that, people want that now. It's not enough to go out and just enjoy an expensive meal because, as we know, restaurant prices, food prices are going up materially and noticeably. And so what else can you add to that to draw people?
So is that something when that space opened up and now you've got to go out and find someone to fill it? Was that top of mind? Okay, we want something entertainment based?
Yeah, it was. We had to look at the space itself. It's almost 20,000 square feet. The majority of it is lower level. So you walk in off of Yonge and there's 1,200 square feet or 2,000 square feet, something like that. And then you go down escalators and you're in this, lower level space. So first and foremost, it's who's going to be 20,000 square feet that wants to do a deal post-pandemic that's able to take subterranean space. Ceiling heights aren't amazing. So immediately you eliminate, a ton of different categories, a ton of different users. We had grocery concepts that were interested, and it was kind of I don't think it clearly didn't work the first time. So, what else can work? So entertainment was one of the key categories that we were looking at. And the Ballroom, they've been operating for 15 years at John and Adelaide very successfully. They have a proven track record and they are eager to jump in and create something new here. So I'm very, confident in them as operators.
So is this something that, they're maybe thinking in the back of their minds, we would love to expand, we'd love to go somewhere, or are they just thinking, okay, we're running a good business here, things are going well, and then they get a call from you and they're like, listen, we have this opportunity, would you guys consider it? And it's kind of boom, mind blown for them. Or is this something that they were thinking of?
Yeah, I think Generally, it's a bit of a combination. And I get that question a lot is like, are we the ones making the calls or are we the ones getting the calls?
Right.
And it really is a combination. There are certain groups that, we've been courting for years and that we've been, working with and trying to convince that Yorkville is the right place for them and finding the right space for them. And then eventually something lines up. And then there's certain groups that make a call and they're like, we're ready for Toronto. Like, what do you have for us? In this case, I would say it was a little bit of both. I mean, they have been actively wanting to expand for a number of years. And I think that the pandemic sort of halted those discussions. Right. I think their existing building is slated for redevelopment at some point. It was probably supposed to be redeveloped and demolished, a lot sooner than it has been. So they've got the benefit of continuing to operate there, but they may not last forever in that space. Right. So in this case, they were really looking to expand and, and then the conversation happens. What spaces do you have for us? And then it's like, how do we make this space work? And we zero in on and say, does this size work? Do these ceiling heights work? Can we design within this space? And that's on them to say, yeah, we can put 8 lanes here and we can put a bar and we can, put all the servicing required, electrical, mechanical, and make it work. So it's a bit of a combination. In this case, they were eager to expand and we were eager to jump on it and say, let's make this space work.
And you're talking about the pandemic. So obviously a lot of things changed. You also brought up, Nordstrom's and, I want to hear a little bit about that. Cause just in my mind, when I'm thinking about it, I mean, I know restaurant wise, you compare something from New York in Miami to Toronto. Obviously Toronto is a huge market. It's the biggest market in Canada, but does it compare to New York? Does it compare to Miami? I imagine that the revenue driven in those huge cities in the US is a lot greater than it is here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the category as well. Like, in Toronto, we have basically for luxury, we have two markets. In my opinion, at least a 2-store market, and the brands are starting to realize that. At one point it was Bloor Yorkville or Yorkdale. I think both our team and the Yorkdale team, have the same message, which is you got to do both. Right. Brands can have 6, 8, 10 stores in New York. They can have 3, 4, 8 stores in Miami. Revenue wise, a location in Yorkville can easily go toe to toe with a location in New York or Miami. Right. They just have capacity to do more.
Like you go to New York and you look up a restaurant and 5 different things pop up and there's like one over here, one over here, one over here. Yeah. Whereas in Toronto there might be 1 or maybe 2, right? Yeah,
exactly. So probably and also like we shouldn't forget that Toronto is the kind of hovers around the 3rd to 4th largest city in North America. So I think in terms of, and it's also really the financial hub. It's where you have both kind of new wealth, business generated wealth, as well as, the sort of the older money side of things. Like this is the city where you have all of that. Vancouver has a really great luxury market for, different reasons, but Toronto's the hub. So when you look at, Toronto compared to other large US cities, we are comparable. And when you look at, revenues that restaurants can do, if it's a great restaurant, it can generate, similar revenues as big markets in the States.
As, as best as you can say, like, why did Nordstrom not work out?
I think that it was a few factors. It's tough we have found, and we've seen a few examples of this, that it's tough for companies sometimes to enter Toronto or enter a new market. And there's different ways that companies go about doing this. I think that Nordstrom in particular, they opened 6 or 7 full price Nordstrom stores, and they opened, I think 7 full price and 6 racks. I think it was it's a different world to enter. There's competition here. There's a focus on operation that maybe wasn't quite there. Maybe they didn't put enough time and effort into understanding the market. I think the pandemic didn't help. I think there's a lot of pressure on the department store world generally. So it's not just Nordstrom, but we look at, Hudson's Bay, we look at Saks, we look at how Holt Renfrew's been changing, and they're a Canadian, institution. So I think, and then corporately there were changes within Nordstrom, and I think, in the grand scheme of the amount of stores that they have and the business size that they have, Canada is like a little blip on their radar, and it made sense for them to, you can't shut down one or two locations. It's kind of an all or nothing situation, right. And unfortunately they went for all of it. But I don't think that it has. I think there's a bit of a misconception, and I think this is very important. Perception is everything. And I think that, when this news comes out to people who don't know the industry necessarily, there's a perception that the Canadian market isn't good, or the Canadian, retail consumer isn't sophisticated enough, and that US concepts will never work here. And I think that's a huge misconception. I think it has much more to do with Nordstrom and the way that they corporately operated, and the way that they entered the country. More so than a statement on Canada as a place for retail.
And that makes sense, because that's what you hear, the chatter, hanging out with your buddies and someone brings it up and everyone wants to seem like they know something about it, right? And, well, that would never work here, or I knew that was going to happen when they came here. It's just not the right fit. And, hearing you talk, it sounds like, a lot of these huge companies that are making tons and tons and tons of money in all these different markets can think that they can just copy and paste. Whereas if you're moving to this market in a different market with different consumers, it might take a little bit more planning, might take a little bit more, like you're saying, operations, and operating differently than in New York, than in Miami. And so, with that being said, does that ever spill into your job a little bit, like helping these companies? Because obviously what's in your best interest is for them to stay forever.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So does it ever, come into your job a little bit to say, no, that we tried that with Nordstrom. That's not going to work. You have to do this, and this. And do you help out with that?
Yeah, so we can definitely help out with that, to an extent. But there are many examples of companies that I think have done a really great job transitioning. An example is a deal that we did with the Webster, which is a super high-end luxury multi-brand retail concept out of Miami. They have about 7 or 8 locations. Maybe now they're closer to 10. They're in Bal Harbour shops. They're in the Beverly Center. The Webster Hotel in Miami was their first location, and it was converted, this kind of like Art Deco style Miami building. They were very, very careful about how they entered the market. They hired the right people who understand, how to build community, how to engage with their clientele. They knew that they had a very good clientele in Toronto because they tracked all of that data. So when they came here, it was almost like there was very little risk, for anyone, because we knew what their numbers were like. They knew what their local customer base was. They had a great team to engage in the community. So they flipped the lights on, and they're in that same world in a lot of ways as Nordstrom. It's multi-brand luxury. They're much more curated, much more personal shopping focused. They've been incredibly successful. They opened during the pandemic. They've been incredibly successful. One more example on the other end of the spectrum would be Chick-fil-A, which you brought up. They were studying the Canadian market for years before they decided to come in. It wasn't like, okay, we're crushing it in the US. We're opening, we're the largest, most profitable, fast food chain in the US. So, we're just going to start opening in Canada and treat it like the 50 whatever state. They were very, very careful about their operations. They set up an operation here. They set up a team here, and they set themselves up for a lot of success. So I think that, there's a bit of a balance there. Like, you really need to, it is a different market. It's a different country. You can't just jump in, thinking that everything you do in the States will work here. But if you think about it the right way, you absolutely can succeed. And there's many examples of that.
And now you go to Yorkdale, and you go up to the food court and there's always a freaking line at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Like I can't ever get Chick-fil-A because it's lined up around the block, and it's, you know, and it's one of those things where, you know, is it perception? Are the chicken sandwiches just unbelievable, or is it branding and like all a part of your business? And so in terms of like, my mind keeps going back to Nordstrom.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, okay, you come here to Toronto, you're this hugely popular brand, and like, are you signing a 5-year lease, a 10-year lease, a 20-year lease? You're thinking you're going to be super successful for 50 years in that location plus. Things don't work out after a few years. I mean, legally, what's happening there? Are you just cutting your losses and saying, well, we're going to have to pay you know, the landlord here X amount of dollars to get out. We just want to get out and move on. How does that work?
So obviously there's a big sort of legal proceeding going on right now, which I can't get into too much detail on, but I can tell you sort of what the process is, which is they created a Canadian entity to sort of manage their Canadian operations. And they're going through a CCAA proceeding with that entity right now. So when you owe creditors, which could be a bank, it could be landlords, it could be suppliers, more money than you have in the bank, then you are, you know, likely going to enter bankruptcy and CCAA, and that's a process they're going through right now. So it's kind of understanding what assets this entity has, and then you know, they're working with a bankruptcy and insolvency consultant who helps to, you know, divvy up the pie essentially. But the pie isn't necessarily going to be, you know, full rent for the remainder of the term. So, you know, there's also things that complicate it, like indemnities. So do any of these leases have a corporate indemnifier from the US? If you have the US company on the hook, then it's a bit of a different story. Right. And then specifically, you know, with our location, but this is the case across the board, is they do have the right to assign their lease. So, you know, will they assign their leases? Will they find a group to purchase their leases, which mitigates, you know, at least some of the damage to the landlord? So, you know, for us at Yonge and Bloor, it's a great location. It's an amazing corner. We're not talking about 200,000 square feet, you know, in Calgary or in Vancouver, full-blown Nordstrom store that's anchoring a shopping center. I mean, again, I think the Cadillacs and the Oxfords of the world, they have great plans for their spaces, and they're, you know, the best in the business when it comes to this stuff. So, you know, I have all the faith in the world that they're going to figure out those spaces. We don't have to, you know, we have an amazing corner, great real estate. Will the lease be assigned? Possibly. Will we, you know, have some kind of settlement discussion? Possibly. We'll see where the chips fall. But at the end of the day, there will be a new tenant in that space, whether it's through their assignment or us releasing it. And I'm actually very excited about that, because I think that we can, you know, between the ballroom and Chick-fil-A and some of the conversations we're having, I think we can actually really enhance that corner.
Well, I know we've been talking a lot about this, but I think it's super interesting because, listen, everybody goes to Yorkville. You whether you're eating there or just going on a walk, or, you know, that's where your gym is. Like, everyone who's listening right now has been to Yorkville.
Yeah.
And so it's not like we're talking about, you know, a little town on the moon. This is, you know, this is Toronto. This is our life. And like, like I live down at Queen and Ossington, and I can walk out and, you know, I feel like there's more of a homey feel here from what Yorkville has been in the past, just because it is so, you know, branded. Yeah, it is so luxury. And sometimes when I'm walking through and I look at the, you know, Balenciaga store, and I'm thinking, well, I'm never going to fucking step foot in there. I can't afford anything in that store, right? So, you know, whereas down here on Ossington, I feel like they're trying to make steps to bring in the more high-end brands, to make it, you know, as much respect as we have for hipsters, less hipster and more luxury, so people spend more money down here. I feel like, is it with ballroom and whatever else is going on next, like, are you guys trying to make it a little more, homey is not the word, but approachable, a little more, not necessarily affordable, but, you know, walking in, like going to ballroom or maybe going to a little bit of a smaller bar or to, you know, boutique stores rather than big box stores.
100%. And so, you know, I think you curate to the neighborhood that you're in. So I think naturally when you talk about Ossington, like Ossington has really sort of gentrified over the past 10 to 15 years, let's say. And naturally with that comes the requirement for higher rents from the landlords, and you know there's only certain concepts that can pay those rents, and so you are seeing, and then there's also, you know, more crowds that come, more dollars that are spent, and so, but it is really important, and I think you know, the landlords in that area, Hallmark being one of them, does a really good job of sort of finding that mix and keeping that kind of historical charm to the neighborhood.
They did like Mandy's and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you know, they have some charm with the local operators mixed with a bit more of that aspirational side of things. But in Yorkville, you know, Yorkville is one of the most densely populated nodes, 1 kilometer radius, but even if you go to the 5 kilometer radius, like one of the most densely populated nodes in the country. And you have a mix of people, and you have office workers that are coming in from, you know, wherever else in the GTA. It's not all super luxury. So what we're trying to do is understand, you know, where that super luxury node within the node lives. And for us, that's Yorkville Avenue. And where the more approachable concepts can be. And that could be like Yonge and Bloor, for example. And then intertwined within that, and you talk about the charm of the neighborhood, you have some of the best independent retailers in the country. You know, we're talking about TNT, Over the Rainbow, you know, even local multi-brand retailers like Andrews, Via Cavour, which is more on the luxury side. But you have these concepts that and these amazing operators that have a clientele that have a place in the neighborhood, and we would never want to create a world where or a portfolio where there isn't a place for them. Yeah. So it's very active. I mean, Summer's Ice Cream is a great example. You know, we just expanded them at 101 Yorkville. That might be a redevelopment site at some point, but Summer's Ice Cream is something, an Axe and Hatch at the barber shop. Like, you need these concepts to, you know, complete the fabric of the neighborhood. Right. So,
and then like tying this in with my business a little bit, I mean, you know, a lot of people right now in the market with interest rates the way that they are, with the way that the market has moved, we've seen in certain neighborhoods, you know, pretty tremendous price drops and certain opportunities for buyers. I mean, I always try, if I'm looking to invest for myself or looking to, you know, give investment advice for my clients, like what retail is going on in the area, you know, what's popping up, because sometimes the first thing to happen in an area to gentrify it is, you know, that store pops up, right? And all of a sudden, people start going to that store, and then another store pops up, another store. Is there a specific area, not to put you on the spot here, but like a specific area in Toronto that you're seeing, you know, that is gonna make a move, and you know you might start seeing property values rise around there because of the retail going in?
Yeah, so I think that, and this would be my opinion only, you know, from my seat, and this may be right, wrong, somewhere in between, but I think in addition to retail, you have to start with public transit and accessibility. And so, you know, Bloor Yorkville, one of the reasons why it's so densely populated and so traffic heavy is because you're sitting on the Bloor Yonge subway line, the two main subway lines in the city. It's midtown, mid-downtown. It's easily accessible in car, bike, you know, and especially public transit. So,
except for parking. You can't fucking park anywhere there.
Exactly. Yorkville Village, you can park. We have 500 parking spaces under Whole Foods, and anyone is welcome. But yeah, accessibility is really important. So I think that when you see areas developing, retail is a piece of it, but retail follows, like, they go hand in hand with residential. There's a lot of like master plan developments that are underway,
right?
And a lot of them are tied to public transit. So, you know, as an example, you look at Eglinton and you look at all of these storefronts that, you know, I feel horrible for these operators that have had to go through this for years and years. And, you know, you see a lot of these kind of shuttered storefronts right now. But I think as the Eglinton line starts or sort of finishes up, and we're seeing evidence of that happening now, to me, all those storefronts along Eglinton, there's an opportunity. I'm not saying for luxury, but I'm saying for, for enhancement, for demand, for people, for density. There's entitlements going in on buildings that maybe never would have been approved years and years ago. So I think it all goes hand in hand, but I would say, anything along Eglinton is strong. I think the core of the city will just always be super strong. But, even moving out east where the 407 was expanded, into Ajax and beyond, like accessibility is super important. So the retail will follow and the residential will go hand in hand.
Yeah, like looking at that Eglinton line, like right at Allen Road.
Yeah.
Okay, so Eglinton West Station.
Yeah.
That's something that right now, there are some streets that are not so desirable, and, when supply was so extremely low as it still is, and then interest rates were so extremely low, people were buying anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. And then what we've seen with the adjustment since February of 2022 is that in those areas where people were kind of stretching to because there was nothing available and everyone was just, spending, trying to buy as quick as possible, those areas have taken a decent hit. Someone who's bought for 1.8 now all of a sudden sees their neighbor's house sell for 1.6 and it's more renovated. But in that Egg West area, once everything's done and you have like transit going both ways, what's the reason that there can't be, eventually luxury there? They're building new condo buildings, but a big thing is getting existing tenants out, right? Like these tenants I don't operate as much in the commercial world, but I can imagine it's not so easy to get, a restaurant or a hairdresser who's been there for 20 years and wants to stay there, right?
Yeah, it's different than residential in that way where there aren't rent controls. So it's not like, you have a tenant and you can only increase their rent, a certain percentage a year, and that percentage basically disappeared, I think, for a period of time during the pandemic. Now it's been reintegrated and it's small percentages, and the Landlord Tenant Act for residential is really, really sort of tenant friendly. On the commercial side, there's nothing stopping a landlord from going to a tenant and saying, your rents are going up. There could be in leases, but it would have to be pre-negotiated in the contract. But that aside, you're allowed to increase the rents, and so you may have a shop that would ideally like to continue, but because of the nature of what's going on in the area, because of the residential development, because of the transit, market rents have increased, they might not be able to stay on their own accord. I would say it would less over time be landlords kicking tenants out and more so tenants sort of getting, unfortunately boxed out of the market. But, like in Yorkville, this is what we try to do when we're working with Ma and Pa's, because we have one side of it, which is we want to create a lot of value and bring rents from $50-$60 a foot to $200 a foot. These local operators can't do that, but how do we create spaces where we can accommodate them? So Majesty's Pleasure going on the third floor above Brunello and Versace, they don't need to be front and center like they are in King Street. They can live on the third floor. Even below them on the basement level, there's a restaurant called Aburi Hana, and they just got a Michelin star. They're one of the restaurants, I think one of the 13 that got a Michelin star, and they're in the basement. So how do you think about space creatively so that you can keep these operators that are so important to the fabric of the neighborhood, but also layer in some gentrification?
Right. And I still have a million questions. I'm still so curious about this, and it's just such a cool topic. It's topical. It's what everybody's talking about, especially with what's going on with Nordstrom, and everyone's looking for all these crazy brands to be brought into Toronto, and everyone's excited about it. And hopefully the next time we have you on the podcast, you can give us some more insight to what's up and coming. But enough about business. I did call you Daddy Yorkville. You are a relatively new daddy. Yes. And, it's something that I can't even start to fathom right now. And because right now it's all business, it's all, real estate, all about selling homes and not yet kissing babies. So how has that changed things? How has that changed your outlook on life? Baby Ella, she's beautiful. Obviously, goes without saying, Maddie, your wonderful wife, is a member of the Stein Realty Group with HomeWise. And now, because, it's such a heavy, huge responsibility, she's starting to get back into the office and get back into things, which is super exciting. But yeah, tell me about daddy life.
Yeah, so it's been incredible. It's definitely a shift in routine. It's a shift in kind of personal responsibility. But I think we got married in 2021, and very fortunately we're able to get pregnant soon after that. And I think that the world and nature gives you the benefit of having 9 months to prepare. So through those 9 months, you figure out how to set up your baby's room and what you need and all this stuff. Nothing will fully prepare you for when the baby arrives and you're taking her home from the hospital and you're like, this is a new human that is now part of the family, and where do we begin? But it's incredible. She's 10 and a half months old now, almost 11 months, which is crazy. So she'll be a year in May. And just the exponential growth that you see from when they're, a little baby, kind of not able to do very much, to now crawling around and laughing and smiling and reaching for things and eating food and saying little words here and there. But, in terms of outlook, for sure, I think it could be cliche to say, but it definitely adds a layer of sort of responsibility. You're no longer just responsible for yourself, you're responsible for your family. And with that comes added pressure. And so, you work a little harder, you think about things a little differently, maybe a little bit more conservative. But overall, that's
what I was going to say. Like, because there's, like you said, there's nothing that can prepare you for it. But I imagine that, now I like to think I have like that Mamba mentality, that killer instinct, do anything to get the deal done and all that stuff. And now all of a sudden there's a whole nother part of your life that's huge, that's hugely important. And, some people, I'm sure, go down the path where blinders are on, business. But, you can't help but, being a little bit more conservative and changing the game plan a little bit. Like, obviously, I'm sure that comes more into play, like long-term thinking, supporting the family, etc. Right?
100%. And people, like you said, people approach things in different ways. For me, being there and being around is incredibly important. My family was like that. So, routines, like I said, change. I was never a morning person. I'm always, the one up till God knows when at night watching Netflix or watching late night sports.
Yeah, Maddie's told me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that was always, I'm a night owl. I'm not a morning person, but now I'm a morning person. So, now I'm up early in the morning helping out, with breakfast and getting things organized, and then go to work. I'm not able to kind of work as late anymore at the office. I try to be home for dinner and bedtime as much as I can. So, you change your routines. Like I would say I work just as hard, if not harder, but you do it in a bit of a different way. Right. And some people have different priorities or different life situations or different jobs where, you have to kind of manage, but in your own way. But for me, I've been able to kind of find that balance pretty well as well as you can. Yeah, it's I wouldn't change becoming a morning person for anything, because it's
looks like
awesome.
You're doing just fine, doing awesome. And listen, I know it took a while to eventually get you on the podcast, but I'm so glad we did. And thank you very much, guys. This has been Down to the Studs. I have no idea what episode after a long hiatus. Hopefully we'll get back into it for you. But Eric Sherman, Daddy of Yorkville, the King. Thank you, brother.
Awesome.